Talk to me. WSRadio.com.
Welcome to Republicans Abroad Radio, the voice of Americans overseas, with your host, Cynthia Dillon.
This morning we have with us Scot Faulkner. He is the author of the bestseller book, Naked Emperor, The Failure of the Republican Revolution. His career in Republican politics spans several decades. A former Reagan-Bush campaign director, he worked on the presidential transition team and on the White House staff, serving in the Reagan administration. In 1995, Scot Faulkner was the first chief administrative officer of the U.S. House of Representatives, overseeing a $1 billion budget at the time. His reforms became the model for the operation of 44 national parliaments and were named the top 100 innovations in American government by the Ford Foundation and Harvard. Today, he advises corporations, foreign governments, and his articles have appeared in well-known publications. He's also a frequent guest with the major networks, and he's executive director of the Dreyfus Initiative. We're truly honored to have with us this morning Scot Faulkner to speak about the budget. First of all, this morning there's a big meeting at 11:15, I believe, between the President and the White House and the Congressional leaders.
Yes, that's correct. The debt ceiling the debt ceiling deadline is looming up on August 2nd, and so today the leaders of both houses of Congress and the President are meeting. And they have to hammer out something because it'll take a few days for the Congress to implement whatever is decided upon. So the clock is ticking on all fronts.
The clock is ticking on all fronts. Now, this has political implications. Do you believe the President is he has to become a deal maker? So, try to do something about it. And can you explain for us the difference between what the Republican position is and the Democrat position?
I think it boils down to that the problem we are having is not because government taxes too much or has too much money or too little money. It is that the government has spent too much, and it's spent too much for many decades. I mean, when you look back at history, the issue is that Lyndon Johnson, another Democratic president, with his war on poverty, which was a dismal disaster back in the 1960s, set up all the entitlement programs except for Social Security that dates back to another Democrat, Franklin Roosevelt, in the 1930s. So a lot of what's sailing us over the fiscal cliff today goes all the way back to the 1960s, when a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president decided to take a number of very key provisions out of the normal budget cycle and turn them into entitlements, which meant they were being driven solely by how many people were deemed to be eligible. In addition, they created a lot of other programs. Medicaid and Medicare both came out of the 1960s, and those time bombs have been ticking now for a good 50 years, and they're about to blow up in America's face and is going to hurt our economy for decades to come.
With your past experience, I mean, how you were in 1995 in Congress.
Right.
You participated. You were right in the middle. Now, I read this morning something that this White House is claiming that it was Clinton's going back to raising taxes is what Clinton did, and it did not affect. There were millions of jobs. Do you have any opinion on that, or what is the difference between 1995 and today?
I think the difference is that we have been borrowing our way into this situation for many decades. Again, it is not just the last 3 years, although the last 3 years certainly pushed the envelope, but the Republicans did not act as Republicans when they had control of Congress, and the result is that a lot of spending took place that shouldn't have taken place going all the way back into the 90s, certainly into the early part of this century. In one way, one can think of it as that we're so far down the wrong series of decisions going back decades that almost any action is going to be problematic. And so we have to look at the world of best-case trade-offs, knowing that every single action is going to be harmful, at least in the short term. The other piece of the puzzle is that no Congress can bind a future Congress. You can bind with treaties, you can bind with statutory law, but no budget resolution can bind a future Congress. So when people talk about a 10-year glide path to a balanced budget or to eradicating our debt, a lot of this is typical Washington blue smoke and mirrors, that a culture of spending has to change, a bipartisan effort to govern and change the spending cycle has to change, and one glorious compromise that puts a lot of these issues 10 years into the future is not going to actually solve the fundamental problems of our government spending too much.
From your viewpoint and from your perspective, what do you think right now is some people are hailing that that the president is or the White House is on a very strong position, and of course Rush Limbaugh says no stay, GOP don't cave in to the White House demands, and what do you think might happen, and how do you view what the president's proposal, the budget proposal is?
Right. Well, the key is that the world is not going to come to an end on August 2nd, so all the dire predictions are just that, dire predictions. However, just like individuals worry about their credit score because that drives the cost of the money they can borrow or if they can borrow money. That's why you have all these free creditscore.coms advertisements on television. That's basically what is facing the United States. If we default on the debts that we've already incurred, because again, remember, the debt ceiling is being driven by actions that have already occurred. The continuing resolutions, the budgets that have been passed over the last couple of years have already put us tracking toward exceeding our debt ceiling on August 2nd. So the cost of money, and unfortunately most of this is the cost of the money that the Chinese are loaning us because they're our main debtor, is going to go up, which will then drive even further debt and further spending down the line. So that's one of the main ramifications of August 2nd, is that if we default even for 24 hours, international banks, international governments that buy American debt are going to charge us more for that debt, and that's going to be harmful in a very fundamental structural way down the line. Again, the government isn't going to shut down, the world isn't going to come to an end, we're not going to turn into Greece, but the key is that a fairly substantial driver in our budget will be a stronger driver, and therein lies what we need to deal with. Now, the blame game is already beginning. It will continue through next year's election, and what we need to do is to change the culture of Washington. Washington loves to spend money, and when they're caught at spending too much money, they say we have to raise taxes because we've got to cover what we're spending. And neither party has really put forth a serious effort to change things. We have so many wasteful programs, so many wasteful projects, so many contractors who are being paid performance premiums even though they're not performing, and that should be a bipartisan effort. Waste is waste, and people, whether they love a program or hate a program, should be against it, and very few people in Washington are talking about waste.
But I thought that in April, when the Ryan plan was they proposed a budget, that they were addressing those issues. That they were addressing.
It was the most serious effort to address the issue in decades, and Congressman Ryan should definitely be given kudos. One of the other issues, which again the Ryan plan is in a positive contrast to, is it has been over 800 days since the U.S. Senate has passed any kind of appropriation or budget resolution that's part of the 1974 Budget Act. The last Democratic Congress completely neglected its basic fundamental responsibility in not passing a budget resolution and not passing one single appropriation bill. Again, this is back under Speaker Pelosi when the Democrats had the votes in the House to pass anything they wanted to. In the Senate, you had the 60-vote issues, but in the House didn't bring one single appropriation bill to the floor for consideration. That's the first time since the 1974 Budget Act that had occurred. So that negligence on the part of the previous Congress, run by the Democrats, the House totally controlled by the Democrats, was sort of the final straw that put us into this current situation. And Ryan has done a great job of putting things forward, but the Republicans in general need to understand that the Pentagon is as bloated a bureaucracy as every other part of the federal government, and we need to start cutting.
We'll be right back. You're listening to Republicans Abroad Radio on WSRadio.com, the worldwide leader in Internet talk.